Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful, empowered harmonizers. We are zooming in and focusing in on a little bit more in depth on a great viewer question, and that is to talk about psychopathic injury, or sort of that really sort of terrified or disoriented stage. Really, I would say not only is it one of disorientation, but it can be one that is devoid of hope or forward looking enthusiasm, joy. And so, really, I want to kind of zoom in and focus in on sort of the movement from grief to joy after experiencing psychopathic injury. Cheers, Happy New Year. I have this great glass that I picked up at a antique store some time ago, and it's got a fun way to have water. Anyway, so moving forward and looking forward, for the new year here, there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of fervor, there's a lot of positive sizzle in the air, and I know we have a lot of international viewers, and certainly it's different with each location with where you're at, but generally, this is the time to lift up, sort of to remove that heavy lead blanket, that feeling of weightedness, depression, apathy, sorrow, and grief, which usually registers as a very heavy and what is a toxic and overwhelming emotion. And it can cause the body to really to be thrust into really unhealthy behaviors, including self-injury, self-harm, self-sabotage, self-negation, self-denial, beating yourself up can be very, very, very severe, where just the fists turn in on itself and it doesn't want to quit. And the cycle just sort of escalates for a lot of people in this, and it is not a healthy release. In other words, it's not a good outlet for the outlet that it is seeking. So there is a grief mechanism that will be set up, and we're talking not only the grief of loss, but when we're talking here on the channel of some very deep, intense states, especially for our viewers who have encountered psychopath relationships, be it family, marriage, sibling, workplace, community, what have you, greater, just in other words, a very sort of adverse impact, and sort of really a very specified injury, meaning it's not just the same injury that you might feel if you were to lose a job or, have pneumonia and then sort of be better, or it's not the same sort of feeling of going through a heartbreak and, you'll get over it. The injury from a psychopathic injury is one that occurs on many, many, many layers and levels that really take you into a place where not maybe a lot of people didn't know their fits of despair, or really what is felt as a terror, mostly of a psychological trap, and that which they feel that they cannot sort of get themselves out of. But I'm here to tell you, you can. It's just a very specific trait. So in other words, the pain is unlike really any other pain that you might have experienced before, so it takes people by surprise. Meaning it's just and then what do you do now? And then so, and it can develop over a period of time. And it can cause a lot of division and divisiveness, particularly against oneself. So that's really where I want to talk about that inner feeling of grief, or even what can become sort of when you kind of work against yourself, which is really, I would say, the result. If you could look at it as almost like if there was a product that the relationship created, like if you could say it's a widget, the result oftentimes is ruin and adversity towards oneself. In other words, self-sabotage, self-denaturing, self-denying. This very sort of very strange, they can go into very dysfunctional or very non-productive and unpleasant ways. Let's just put it at that, where people, become self-injurious. And there's other, issues where people have gotten into, they're so upset that they'll just begin fouling things up for themselves. Or they might even, I'm saying, they get so worked up and then they start like yelling at the computer and then punching it out. So, these are just what it looks like. So in other words, but when you're experiencing a psychopathic injury, there's a specific type of grief and really a loss of connection with your own inner fire. And there's a loss not only of that, but the ignition and the lighting of that sort of breathes on hope, which should be not like reserved for the rich, not just a once in a while luxury, that once in a while you have hope. When you go through the stages of love bombing, devalue, and discard, in this psychopath relationship, and you experience a psychopathic injury yourself, in other words, a injury as a result, an inner experience, a bodily experience, an emotional, you own this. I mean, this is your feeling. These are your muscles contracting. This is your, lungs reacting in response. This is how you feel, how you hold your head up or how you don't hold your head up, where you look or where you don't look, what you grab onto for dear life or what you don't hold onto for dear life. So usually the problem with the psychopathic injury is to understand, the profile of the psychopath, and that namely is that they are devoid of conscience, meaning they are completely devoid of moral character. Not just like, oh, that guy is a bad guy or that's a bad actor. We're talking about really darn and deep, cold-rooted, psychopath. And they're not just the people who you would think who would be moseying down the street with a specific look that you would maybe think or give it. These are people who, are, cool, calm under pressure, who are just could be the softest teddy bears and you would never suspect. These are the people who you would consider unassailable, people who you would never expect, go up against, or need to challenge. So it becomes not only a difficulty of confrontation, but there is a real terror that comes with this relationship because of what is sort of really the denial and deviousness with which they set up your reality. In other words, there is a premeditated, the real harm, the danger, which I would say sets apart the psychopath. So namely is that they lack a conscience and they have no regret. So, and they don't experience the sort of range of normal emotions that are warm in temperature. That you would consider based on humanity, love, gratitude, brotherhood, patriotism, nobleness, helping, another who is in need. All these sort of other etheric intangibles are not within the realm or the repertoire of that individual. So they don't have that layer, but they are very good at acting as if. So the people oftentimes will ooze and be ooze charm and be very magnetic, just like you cannot keep your eye off of them. There's something about them, the buzz in the air. I mean, you can almost touch it. You can almost see it. It can, there's just something that emanates from them. You might think it's holy or divine or sex appeal or handsome or gorgeous or something like this. So, but there's this usually because of these qualities of a psychopath, namely that they're devoid of conscience, snakes in suits, without conscience. I mean, these are the titles of books that you can read that describe this. Dr. Robert Hare made a lot of progress in this area in terms of understanding this profile. And of course, it isn't always blabbed out, and over, lunch, general dinner conversation. Yeah, you see that psychopath, people have it's usually, not to be spoken, or to arouse fear or suspicion, or, what do who you're saying what about, in other words, then all of a sudden you're under question for thinking, calling somebody out who is immoral in character. Maybe they're just, this is how they do business, and this is how it is, and maybe you should learn it should be done this way, sort of situation. So there becomes the development then of this inner critic if you go up against the psychopath, who really becomes sort of on a pedestal, the number one just sort of archetype, if you will, in a relationship, in a family, in a community, in a workplace. So they set up really just this sort of magnetic playground around them, that everybody is just sort of, playing off of their energy, which is very magnetic, oftentimes very appealing, very attractive in nature, that oftentimes has very high sexual overtones. And even if the relationship is not sexual in nature, it can be communicated this way, and really elicits that sort of very primal reptilian sort of brainstem like desire, like I have to have, like, and everything else is like shut out of view. Like it becomes this like all or nothing, just sort of go for it. The relationships will be very soothing, very balmy, very like the answer to your prayers. So, these are some sort of typical responses that people will examine, before the injury. In other words, there's this floating quality of the relationship. There's this fairy book-like quality. It happened so fast. I was swept off my feet. I never thought me. I was waiting for so long. It seems so perfect, nothing else could compare. So there's this sort of, unanimous being sort of swept up. But the problem with a psychopath is that along with this magnetic, oftentimes is the abandoning of one's values in the course, a letting go or loosening of one's boundaries and standards while this is occurring. In other words, the snake oil salesman, but worse. I mean, you would not expect this from this person, or it's very contrary, to what they might come across as, and that so you would never. They would be the very unsuspecting, and they're oftentimes very successful, very talented. So why would you challenge? I mean, they're just they've always got the fullest cup. They've always got the baddest car. They've always got the, it's just they always shine up and beyond. So the problem, though, not only with their radiance, though, is the problem of the deception, gaslighting, and brainwashing, that they will mislead others with whom they are wanting something from. So if they're wanting something from, like, business contacts, someone to pay their shoe bill, someone to pay their Friday night escapades, somebody to get married to so that they appear normal. They will take any and all sorts of in-depth action steps to take and really create this sort of panorama that they wish to present to the world. But oftentimes this is an act. And so the injury really is very deep and creates a grief. So it's important to understand the psychopathic bond, to understand the depth, and to sort of really, really remove that grief at that deepest sort of really in the body, deep in the the solar plexus, like in within the organs, in within the neurology, the muscular and neurology coming together, the neurophysiology, which is really part of the muscular system, whereas really where the healing has to take place. You have to really understand when you're dealing, and I know that there's so many important details to feather out here. When we talk about this, which is very fascinating, I feel, and very significant towards healing, is to understand that when you're in a psychopathic relationship, because they are devoid of conscious morality and have no regrets, and they are also absence of fear. So things that normally that people would not do, they have no qualms with doing whatsoever. They have, where most people would see a electric fence, don't go there. They're like, what electric fence? I can just, it's like they have like, x-ray vision. They just see solutions. They see the people to talk to. Because they are devoid of these other sort of emotional experiences, they're very high level on other experiences. So, think of it as sort of an over adaptation, or not an overcompensation, but you can imagine that if certain areas of the brain are slowed down due to inactivity in the psychopath, like their wiring is different, reduced activity in the amygdala, the fear center, the arousal of the fight or flight. So when you go, oh my God, do this, like they're just cool as a cucumber. They're like, do what? They don't even have that flinch reaction. And so they're very, they then instead, from what I am able to observe and understand in my research and studies, is that they're more able to just sort of process on a very, I would say, they're able to process on a very non-emotional way, not even more than objective. They're just able to more see really the weakness inherent in others, which is I would assume seems glaring to them to a psychopath in all ways, because they really sort of interpret other matters of the heart as just really speed bumps to getting where you want to go in life. They're like, why would you even waste any time? Why would you even think? Why would you even do? Why would you even stumble on this? For them, it's just, they're on a beeline. They're like, I already got this. And they're like, you've got months and years of heartache and, being sensitive about this and that. They're not caught up in any of that. So they really feel, I think, sort of really juiced up, and they have a high level, they have a high sensitivity to dopamine, 4 times more sensitivity to the neurochemical dopamine than the rest of the population. So when they want something, their emotional slot machine is like ding, ding, ding. They're like, bring it on. It's just like full throttle, emotional tsunami just, just I think washes over them, and they're on it, especially when it's certain, different high levels, and they can rise to occasion very quickly, rise in organizations very quickly. So they're just, you'll just see these people just sort of really, slingshot right into high levels, and you're like, how did that guy get there? But the problem is then they're going to keep it, they're going to create a wake of victims in their wake. They're going to leave sort of a wake of victims, people who are like, how did this happen to me? I didn't see this coming. It's because you did not have the awareness or understanding or perception, because they will masquerade and have a facade as if, and they create this customized to the individual with whom they want to target or to obtain something or whatever it is. And that can vary. It can vary from, they want a place to live, they want a place to hang out, they want a place to hide, they want to get married and appear like this and this and this, so it's like a decoy relationships, decoy jobs. I mean, you there's all sorts of crazy stories, about what these people do. They just sort of just don't see the regular rules or norms as applying to them. They just don't even feel it. So these people are oftentimes applauded and lauded as leaders, because they're very cool under pressure. They don't really have any sort of stress or get really hot under the collar, where most people of normal sort of psychology would. They'd just sort of get an overwhelm and, a fight or flight response, and these individuals do not. So they can really catapult to certain areas. They just and they know this about themselves, and they feel that this sets them apart and makes them superior. So, in that way, they're sort of, you know, on a sort of a category of their own. So you must really understand how they stand apart, and really develop an awareness of how they stand apart. So for somebody, like myself, who has studied, work with, etc. So this is, on my awareness, my radar, and then so hence the healing discussion here, because there is not a lot of information out there for people who have encountered this sort of really, glowing relationship or character, and then really the opposite ends up turning out to be the case, the truth, really what is going on. And it's very, very complete, the facade versus what's going on underneath. I mean, to the hot and cold of the sub-zero, to the polar vortex, to the balmy Bahama, facade with which they'll carry around. I mean, they can be hot and balmy. They can be polar vortex, cold that, you would, really into a criminal level, and beyond, just sort of they have no sense, they have no sensitivity. So they don't have this sense. And so when they're in relationships with others, whether it's an individual, a company, a community, a family, there is going to be a very, very replete level of deception with which they are planting, and it is very pre-calculated and premeditated, the agenda. In other words, it's not a natural, organic, evolving of a true, we're in love, and let's get this convertible, and let's just drive off into the stars and wear silk and and bamboo in our hair, or whatever it is your fantasy that you want to do, and we're going to roll around on the beach, or whatever it is your fantasy that's natural and organic, that is in your cellular musculature. So what I'm then talking about really is it's then embedded in the soma, the terra firma of your body, and then your groundedness. So not only the body, so we're talking then that there then occurs a very injury in this space, which really not many people have experienced, maybe will experience, or will be aware of the tragedy or injury thereof, unless they really see when the mask falls, and you really do see sort of what's behind the mask, like the Wizard of Oz. And the guy's behind there going, and then it's just like this guy, And so it's that foolery, trickery, deception to the nth highest level degree, which you cannot even fathom. Imagine that someone would be capable of, that they could even internalize doing, that you can't imagine a human being would have the audacity. I mean, there's no really some words oftentimes to describe the level with which they will deface or hurt others. So the level of harm, injustice, ruin, injury, heartbreak, and the problem is that it is one of intent. So unfortunately, part of the psychopath feedback loop is that they get pleasure, that dopamine, from seeing others in pain. And it doesn't have to be like a physical pain. It's the pain from them knowing that they have misled you, and then see you, give up the business, give up your kids' education, give up your dreams for your own retirement, start doing this or this for them, and then, to the point where you maybe, don't know yourself, but you thought it was a new you, and then there is no us, you realize that this was just a phantom relationship. Of such, and then understanding this, and then creating this sort of intramuscular sort of meshment, and then the pulling away of this creates a real grief. So in other words, owning where is that inner fire, because oftentimes this realization almost can put out your fire, so to speak. It can almost be such a adverse state that is created and inoculated and set up within the victim, which oftentimes is oftentimes, I think, very terrorizing, what you almost might put on the level of criminal warfare at like the federal level. When you hear about these high level techniques where they do this and this to the enemy, or we hear about, right now, this is not meant to get political at all. But, we talk about, these concentration camps in these other countries that are sort of formatting and brainwashing their values. So it's, they're relieving them of their own culture and just, do you see what I'm saying? I'm not trying to get sensitive here, but what I'm saying is that there's a very similar experience where they sort of relieve you of your own happiness, or that organic sort of growing and then being able to be buoyant and resilient. There is a process in a programming where you're then sort of demoralized, and the problem is not to be stooping to their level, because in their beginning their level might be very, very high, but actually the terror oftentimes brings out the worst of people, and they're like raging, they're like monsters. They're like growing hair on their hands, like, they become like they don't even know who they are. They're growing fingernails, they're growing hair, they're like Robin Williams, just, like, or the Hulk, or, any sort of madman, those guys, they're growing the big blonde ponytails, they're just, they become but against themselves. And, this is not pleasant. And, this is grief. This is the feeling of loss. This is the feeling of getting out of touch with something that's really sort of, grounded and strong, and has not only a pride, but there's a certain presence. And it is that same neural network of pride and sort of self-sustaining that is injured in the psychopathic injury. So, and I was studying about that sort of neurophysiology. There's sort of that feel-good state where, like, you're like, I'm proud of myself. That same circuit, neurologically, that cycle within, that whole cycle, if you think of it like a computer little area, that is where the psychopath goes snip, 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 and then they get it all messed up, chaos, and then has it go the other direction. In other words, then you develop this sort of pride from denying yourself. And it becomes to the point where you get into an exhausted or depleted or hopeless state. So the hope is where you have to really realize that is, the removing of that is part of the psychopathic injury. Is to understand that oftentimes that had been enmeshed with something that had been ignited by something very toxic and sort of against you, anti-you, your values. And even though it seemed like the incorporating of this, there was a denial and a sabotaging of this, which becomes a very insidious, very uncomfortable internal position. So when we talk about healing, and really getting from grief to joy, realizing that your joy is knowing, in that that same process of looking forward is what makes you unique and sets you apart. That is then sort of incorporating from your inner values. So the sort of reignition, the sort of plugging in the most basic of wires back into that little value system that got sort of mucked up, swamped out, swept over, packed with sludge, broken out, denied within you. If there is an inner connection, is what I'm driving at, that is within you, that is uniquely installed, that sort of works every time. In other words, it always works better when if there is something that follows that statement, there is something, in your action. But even more so, to sort of get back to that joy, is to know that same cycle just needs to be set free that grief, which is the questioning and the denial of self, and the feeling as if you are at a loss or a deficit, and that you are not, that part of you is sort of not able to be restored, is sort of the very intense fear, which is very unique to a psychopathic injury. In other words, part of you has been almost, I don't want to use this, say, part of you has died, the day that music died, or it sort of feels, you cannot compare it. It's beyond compare. It is all new. Excuse me. It is a very, very, very sort of new level of terror or fear for a lot of people. In other words, a sheer resourcelessness. But it is based on fear. So in other words, there's a whole different physiology that is at work and then creates a different set of behaviors. So what you want to understand is the getting and restoring with your values, so that your behaviors are in alignment. So there's this sort of new cohesiveness, rather than this sort of feeling of hopelessness and desperation and despair, which is usually the output of the psychopathic injury. There's this very sort of hopeless state, which is, again, it is designed to inflict that upon you. So, but it is an inflicted state, which is very, very insidious, very, very painful. And oftentimes people, the feeling does not go away for some time. And it's very difficult to then communicate it to others, because other people do not get it. They're just skipping through, they're just skipping through my tulips. They're just, and they just don't get, you're just sort of walking on the fringe a little bit. And that is okay. That is okay. That is where you need to be. But realizing that to get from that grief to that joy is to realize that, that the body needs to be then used and connected to in a new, loving, and especially a high temperature, compassionate way, knowing that you have within, even that vision maybe that you lost that was part of the injury, because part of the psychopathic injury is that forward looking, or feeling that you've done something inherently wrong, like that there's this feeling of guilt, or you've of grave sin, or because this person is so devoid, and you've of certain morals, that by in the relationship with them, that sort of gets leached out of you. It gets sort of removed. In other words, you become sort of numb to and your own values, and you then sort of abandon those. So that's where it sort of really ratchets up. So you have to flip that into the joy, and then realize then the joyousness is knowing that you do have everything within to move on. It's the denial of that awareness and experience that's part of the aftermath of the psychopathic injury. It's as if it's not it's not good, or it won't be